Welcome to Patricia Fripp's Powerful Persuasive Presentations. Welcome to our event where our goal is to give you 5 specific areas, at least, that you can improve your presentation skills. We have people who are part of our VT community. We also have those who are partners from different parts of our just various newsletter lists, partners in business. First lesson with delivering a good presentation. Always be aware that content is around you. The best technology can very often be a notepad or a pen. And wherever you go, you will find inspiration that becomes part of the treasure trove of your life. So point 1 is you have to have something interesting to say. And point 2 is that wherever you are in the world, something interesting will happen that can one day end up in a speech. And that is your teaser to get started. Let me introduce to my co-presenter, who is really the super admin, Paul, who will tell you how you can ask questions and participate in polls.
Hello everyone. On the right hand side of your screen, to the right of the video play, you can see a chat box. That's where you can enter any questions you might have. Just keep them short and specific. And then also throughout the presentation we'll be doing polls, which will be yes or no answers. You click your answer, click the vote button, and then click back on the chat tab to return to the chat. If you have any questions, just let us know. We'll answer them during the call.
Perfect. Yesterday, I was at a memorial service for a friend of mine from the Golden Gate Breakfast Club. Wonderful, much-loved person. And it occurred to me that you might be in similar circumstances. He died unexpectedly last week. Chuck was getting ready to come to our breakfast meeting. The Golden Gate Breakfast Club has an important part in my life because it was the first group I ever spoke to, and I became their first woman member in 2000. And as I heard Chuck's son give a very poignant and funny back story about his dad's life with some information none of us knew, the secret missions he had in Vietnam and what really amused him. And what he did, which I've seen many executives do, he had all his notes on a small mobile device, which was fine, except, of course, he was looking down a lot of the time. Next point, which is point 3, you cannot emotionally connect to your audience if you don't look at them. And what I would have recommended he did, and what you do in a circumstance, it's okay to have notes, especially something that you didn't know you would have long to prepare, is write your bullet points in 20-point type and print them on a large sheet of paper, and you can have several sheets of paper, and put them down the page. Don't write as paragraphs, and you can put them on the lectern. Now this is the secret. How often have you seen a presenter with notes say, "Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the annual meeting of the Accountant Society." Now, if you have notes, what you do, you look down at your notes, see what it reminds you you're going to say, and then look at the audience and say it. Then I, of course, reflected on my own parent celebration. And with any presentation, whether it's something such as a memorial, or it could be any presentation, a sales presentation, a keynote speech, running a staff meeting, have a good opening line. We started our memorials for our parents with, "We are here to celebrate a life, not to mourn a passing." And feel free to use that if you have to do that. Now, this morning at the Golden Gate Breakfast Club, one of our popular members, Rich, who was a police commander, just retired. And he was telling about some of his funny experiences and poignant moments in being a police officer. And I took these notes because I knew you would want to know this. So this is how he opened his presentation. And there's a formula here that you can use. Let me read it to you. Being a police officer is like having a front row seat at the greatest show on earth. After 30 years, I realized we were part of the greatest show on earth. Now, if you're taking notes, write this down. Being a fill in the blank for what you do is like. And this is also a superb way to connect to an audience. When I have interviewed audience members before I spoke, I've asked many of them to fill in that sentence, and it's given me wonderful, funny, and serious and interesting points of view that I can use in the presentation. Now, point 5, just in case you're counting, and excuse me if I give you so much information I lose track of the points. But point 5 is when you quote individuals who are in your audience from interviews before the presentation. 1, they know you cared enough to find out. 2, they are going to really listen and connect to you. And they're always excited to hear what their own members or they say. Which reminded me of another important lesson, point 6. This was taught to me by Lenora Billings Harris, very dynamic speaker and past president of the National Speakers Association. When she spoke for our National Speakers Association chapter when she was president, in her PowerPoint, she puts photographs of many of the members of our chapter, which was very engaging and a great way to customize the message. It's a principle I've used with other audiences, and you will never go wrong making it more about them. Now let's go back to being a is like. Perhaps you're familiar with my example of when I helped my next door neighbor, Mike Powell, deliver a presentation to a lay audience, a business women's group, when he was a senior scientist at Genentech working on an AIDS vaccine. And I said, Mike, your audience, we don't spend time with scientists, and even if we meet any, we don't know what they're talking about. Can you tell us what it is like being a scientist? And this is how he started his presentation. Being a scientist is like doing a jigsaw puzzle in a snowstorm at night when you don't have all the pieces and you don't have the picture you're trying to create. Isn't that good? Now, point 6. What also made this point good was how many visual words. When it comes to being powerfully persuasive and a dynamic presenter, let's look at the quality and the visualness or the action of your words. Good. So then let's also go back to my friend Rich's speech this morning to look at another principle. And this is principle 7, which is finding meaning in everyday situations that don't normally have meaning attributed to them. In other words, we listen to speakers and we think they're dynamic and incredible, or we listen to humorists and say they're so funny, and we make the comment, but nothing like that happens to me, nothing funny, nothing interesting. Yet very often they are talking about everyday situations. And this is one of the lines. Now again, so the point is, look at the great situations in everyday life and attribute meaning. Also look at the great lines. And if you can give other characters within your story the best lines. For example, he was talking about early in his career, for 2 years he worked in the San Francisco jail. And this is what his boss told him. He said about the inmates, talk to and listen to everybody. However, don't believe a word that they say. And that was funny and poignant and interesting. Now, Paul, let's just look. Has anyone asked any questions, or have they been hanging on my every word?
They've been hanging on your every word so far.
Okay, good. Well, feel free. If you have any questions, we will look at them periodically. Now, perhaps, Paul, let's look at our polls. What could we be asking our attendees? Are they happy with this speech structure? Because as you know, we're talking about the content, and every content has to be organized around a structure. So you can answer the question while I'm telling you more about Rich. If you are happy, do you have a foolproof way to structure your remarks, to organize it? Now, Rich was telling us about what you have to learn when you are new, and that is at night when you put the inmates into prison or into their cells, you have to watch for the green light or the red light, because the green light shows that they are locked in. The red light means their cell's open. And he found it amusing that there was this gentleman, Tommy Flanders, he'd gone to high school with. And he was in Max 6, which meant he was one of the toughest people, and they were very concerned to get him locked in. So he looked, and to him, he had to look at 50 lights, and he thought they were all green, so he walked away. And a few minutes later, walking up behind him as he's talking to some of the other officers, here comes Tommy, who had walked out of his cell. And he said, Rich, I thought you'd like to know you didn't lock our cells. So the 6 toughest people, the one they wanted locked in, he'd forgotten. And he said, it's interesting, you look at 50 lights and he couldn't spot the one red one. Now, it's interesting that Tommy had enough affection from him from high school that he told the other 5, stay where you are. And they listened to him. He was the leader. Now, why is that important to find these reflections? And as you develop content to put in your speech, I recommend you take the once upon a time technique. You go to the beginning of your life and career, and you do a timeline and just trigger memories of these stories. When we are speaking as an expert, or in Rich's case, he got to a very high position in his chosen career. It's good to connect on a personal level by demonstrating with these amusing stories that you don't always know what you now know. It gives an audience hope to talk about a time you didn't know what you were now teaching them. And another principle, which I mentioned to him after, at this point it's about 8, 9, or 10, who knows how many points we're at now, and that is, you need to show the audience the person behind the position. You have a title. You're in authority. You're the leader. You're the expert. You're the speaker. The audience will connect to you when they see the human side. They might look up to you in your position. It's nice for them to be able to say, oh, that's just like me. I remember dumb things that I did when I was early in my career. All right, Paul, we have a couple of questions, so would you like to read them to me?
Yes, the first question is from Janice. Does a keynote really have to have just 3 main points, or can it be sort of a stream of consciousness to persuade the audience to take a specific action, such as put an example in of your everyday life?
Right. Well, a keynote speech can be, I wouldn't call it stream of consciousness, because your stream of consciousness comes before you put together your presentation. Then we have to organize it in a logical flow, which becomes your speech structure. So let's just look at the results of the poll before I answer part 2 of Janice's question.
Are you happy with your speech structure? 63% of everyone said yes, and 38% said no.
All right, good. Well, there, of course, and the Frip speech model is the first 30 seconds, the last 30 seconds has the most impact. This is why we always focus on great opening lines like being a police officer. And we want to close on a high. And every speech, conversation, presentation has a central theme. What is the big idea? And if you look at, for example, Rich's speech, it was based on 30 years, his 30-year career. And it could be, this wasn't exactly his title, but this could have been his subtitle, was Lessons Learned from 30 Years in a Police Career or Law Enforcement Career. So, for example, one of my earlier speeches was, everything I learned about business, I learned behind a hairstyling chair. So write that down as a trigger to get ideas for speech frameworks. Now, the structure, for example, with Rich, was the different times of his life. Early in his career, later when he was in leadership, and his wisdom that comes from reflecting on the 30 years, and then the question is, what's next? And he said, well, perhaps I'll run for sheriff. I don't know, it's worth considering. Now, if you look at my speech, everything I learned about business, I learned behind a hairstyling chair. Part of this could be what I learned from bosses. Now, that is one chunk of content. Second is what I learned from my clients. And then third could be what I learned putting all the influences and the influence from my father, who was an entrepreneur, into action. So you see, it might appear like a stream of consciousness. What it really is a logical flowed conversation. So I see we have more coming in, so read the next one.
Yes, the next one is from Imran. How do we encourage our children to be good at public speaking?
There is nothing that will help a person's career more than being a powerful, persuasive presenter. Nothing. Therefore, encouraging young people at an early age is a very good idea. You might give personal stories about how you did well because you could stand up, you could represent your company. I remember one of my friends, Steve, when he worked with me, I sent him to a Dale Carnegie course, as I did all my staff, on public speaking. In his next job, was working for a much bigger company. One day his boss came in, handed him a sheet of paper, said, read that. Do you understand it? Steve said yes. He said, good, I want you to get on the plane, go to our industry convention, and give a presentation on that. Now, do you realize he was the newest hire? However, his boss had the most confidence in him that he could speak for the firm, more than even going for himself. Now, you find examples from your everyday life and just constantly reinforce it. If you find a good speech on YouTube, you might want to show them. And talking about YouTube, why don't you write this down, and when this is over, is go to YouTube and type in how to open and close a presentation. And you will find a good example that I use the circular technique that I use with my mother's memorial, as that's how we started this conversation. Next question, Paul.
The next question is, do you use the Fripp speech structure for all of your speeches, or do you have different structures for different types of speeches?
Yes, I use my Fripp speech model for all my speeches. That does not mean they sound the same. And the Fripp speech model, open, close strong, what's your central theme, what are your talking points that prove your premise, that make your case, and then how did you develop the chunks. If you were going to give a 10-minute speech, it could be the equivalent of one chunk. So you introduce an idea, and then you might give an explanation of it, and then an example, and then what would be the application for the audience. You might look at your speech, and remember, one of those chunks could be, you could look at the speech down the page. And this is the advice that I recommended for Rich, and I would give the same advice to you. Everything starts with a blank piece of paper. It does not start with a PowerPoint. It starts with a blank piece of paper. And I said, now, Rich, you are a good speaker. You're amusing. You have great stories. People love hearing you conversationally and in a presentation. So this is what I challenge you to do. Go home and get a flip chart. And I want you to have different sheets of paper. And the first sheet, I want you to list all the stories that you remember. Then you, to the side, is this amusing? Is this a leadership lesson? Is it poignant? Like his story about, and this is the point that goes with the story. He said, a very high percentage of the time that a citizen is a victim, alcohol or drugs are involved. And he gave an example, and he got very emotional because he talked about the kids and crashed into a pole, and the passenger, who was 16 years old, was killed instantly. And they said they had to pull them out to help the paramedics, and in his sock were 2 tickets for a concert for the next night. And he said, that's not a good place to keep your concert tickets. It's not a good idea to be drinking and driving. All right, so you see, you look at the poignant and the funny about his friend in jail. Then you look at the leadership lessons. So, for example, one of the lessons, he said, when I was a commander, oh, great, now I can sleep at night. He got a call from the officer in charge when it was the Occupy movement, and they had to move these individuals, and they had 100 police officers there. Obviously, it was totally out of control. He said that the officer who called was laughing and screaming, and he knew there was something wrong. And his wife said, hey, you've got to go down there. And he thought, well, now as a commander, I thought I could sleep at night. He went down, immediately said to one of the officers, can you get all the police officers in 4 lines, and we're going to do this. And the strategy to solve the problem. So you see, we hear the lessons he learned from others. So this is all on a chart. And then you can look at all the different situations you've been in. You look at the really valuable lessons. All this has to be out on flip charts. And I said then, when you give a presentation, it's very easy to look at the stories. You go back to the same group again. is think of, they've never heard this. This is a funny one. This is a poignant one. This is a leadership lesson. And I said, don't feel bad if you told the stories before, because he spoke for the group 2 years ago, and it was a great speech, and I missed it. And it was so good, the next week when he turned up, they said, hey, the speaker hasn't made it. Can you give us another speech? We always feel nervous delivering the same speech to an audience who's heard us before, and you want it to be different. But remember, every rock show knows, every band, every singer, you have to give the audience what they're used to hear and familiar while you're introducing your new songs from your new album. Hope that's helpful. But the quick answer is yes, I use the speech structure for every presentation, formal or informal. Paul?
The next one comes from Philip. How can one beef up the impact of their speech when on the radio?
Well, the good news is if you are on the radio, now you're not seen, so you'll have to have a lot of energy in your voice. And it's not bad to have notes that are well scripted, even if it's triggers of what might come up, because the audience doesn't see you. A lot depends on, are you the host of the show or are you a guest on the show? If you are a guest on the show, you need to send suggested questions in advance, because you will be appalled. Most people do not do their research. Help them out. Paul?
The next one comes from Danish. Can you give your thoughts on the phenomenon of the Chevy guy becoming a good spokesman despite doing everything wrong, if you know the reference?
I really don't know enough to give you an honest answer. However, part of hearing comments such as a certain speaker, Tom Peters, breaks all the rules. Yes, you have to understand the rules of the principles and make a strategic choice to break them. Whenever somebody, like this character, does something what we consider wrong, at least it gets you talking, which is why there's a certain shock value in some shows. It's to get your audience remembering and repeating what you said. We, of course, at Lady and the Champs, World Champions Etch, and Frip VT encourage you to be remembered and repeated for all the right reasons. And if you want to tweet, feel free to tweet, be remembered, speak to be remembered and repeated, hashtag FripVT. We have it next to my name to remind you. Open with impact, hashtag FripVT. Find meaning in everyday life. How about this? Give the best lines to your characters. Because in Rich's story, his wife said, you can't go back to sleep, you've got to go down there. This emotionally connects you to every woman who gives her husband advice. Well, of course, you've got to listen to your wife. And every man who listens to his wife. Next question.
What would you say to someone that believes that PowerPoint almost always comes in the way of the speaker connecting with the audience?
I would, and this is a big part of my life with my corporate clients, I would say PowerPoint is a visual aid. It is not a scripting aid. Hashtag FripVT. It is a visual aid, not a scripting aid. And PowerPoint, by nature, just as a speech structure, is tidy and organized. The creative process is messy. This is why I'm saying get a pad, get a flip chart, list your stories, list your points, list the quotes, list the characters, list the advice. And then your first part is organize the speech structure. Then when you have that in place, then you say, where do we need a visual or a chart or a diagram or a visual to reinforce what we are saying? Most of my corporate clients, I also say, I'm not saying don't show that information. However, take it apart into 5 different segments and use it as a build which brings one part over another and puts it together. Also realize if there's too much content on a PowerPoint slide, they can't look at that, they can't read and listen to you. You need to understand that the speaker is more important. And when you want them to look at the PowerPoint, direct your attention. You might want to look at it, even if you then look back, because the audience will follow your eyes. Next question.
This one is also from Imran. Have you ever used a voice trainer for yourself, and do you recommend one?
If you need one, yes. I have over the years worked with many individuals. I went to a speech pathologist for a while just to make sure some of my English, which is Dorset English, was understandable. You do believe that we speak the same language in America and England. We don't exactly. And some of the way my Dorset accent that has a tendency to put H's in words that don't belong, in isolation you wouldn't perhaps understand the word I was saying. You might in the context of what I was saying. Also, I've worked with an acting coach. What an acting coach does is really teach you how to breathe. And one of the techniques that she taught me, if you find you have a monotone voice, sing, and I can't sing, but sing your script. And you can practice this by just picking up a book or magazine or newspaper and sing it just to yourself, just to get some variety within what it is you are saying. Next question.
Then the next one is from Stephanie. If you are a trainer, does the Frip speech structure work for this type of presentation as well?
Yes. The speech structure, if you think of one talking point with, let's go back to an example or an explanation, an example, and an application, with a training, then perhaps, depending on how long it is, you are going to perhaps have them do an exercise or role play. You expand it longer. And if you would think the speech model, which has a strong opening and a strong close, and talking points that are developed, think of that as when you go for the coffee break. Can you make a comment or say something interesting to send you off into the break and then to bring you back? And then, of course, you look at it again from the coffee break to lunch, from lunch to the afternoon. So it is multiple versions. I had a client who taught 2-day training. It was really self-defense. And the same framework for the 2 days was the same as an hour speech. And his premise was everybody, including small women, can protect themselves against opponents who are bigger, stronger, and faster. That's the premise. Can you see a 2-day training summed up in a 1 sentence? Then the answer, of course, is, the question is, how do I do that? 1, understand anatomy. 2, stay out of situations that potentially could be disastrous. Don't go to the ATM at midnight. Don't. Wait till 6 o'clock in the morning. And then 3, you have to program responses into your body so they become automatic. Now, in an hour speech, he shows video clips and tells stories and examples. In the 2-day training, then you have exercises and you're actually working with partners, you're actually doing the exercises that you have to program into you. Same talking points, same premise, expanded out into practical applications. So if you think of it this way, a keynote speech is introducing your ideas at a higher level of abstraction with examples and application. A training is going deeper, more nitty-gritty, and getting the audiences involved. Perhaps at some of the events, if you've been in my live sessions, we have mini coaching. So we bring people out of the audience. We say, okay, what's your opening line? And speak until I touch you, which means I have a suggestion. And the suggestion doesn't necessarily mean that you're doing anything wrong. It just means perhaps you want to have another way of looking at how you present it. So, for example, my 5 points of how you get your presentation to a next level are: how do you start? How do you structure? How do you tell good stories? Add razor-sharp specificity and emotionally connect with your audience. And it just occurred to me, because although some of you have not tuned into one of these events, some of you are very familiar with the events and hear examples of this in the virtual training. However, a different look at it, what happened to me yesterday? In fact, this is another technique. Tweet this, #FripVT. You can have a core speech that stays the same by introducing an idea or a situation I was in yesterday, as in the memorial service, and this morning Rich's speech. You know, this just happened. Now, perhaps I might not have repeated everything that happened as tight as if I repeat this 3 years from now. It keeps all the other advice fresh because I introduced new information that just happened. Do we have any more questions, Paul?
We have 2 more. From Sharuk: do foreign accents help or hurt a professional speaker? If the latter, is it a good idea to take accent reduction classes?
Having an accent, and we all have accents to some individuals, some audiences, needs to be understandable. Even with a British accent, and I probably speak more clearly and concisely than many, at the beginning, slow down while people get used to how I sound. If you keep hearing people tell you that you are not understandable, accent reduction is a very good idea. And I have a person that I recommend who's in the Bay Area who's very good with this. And it might be considered for many of, and remember, we speak to international audiences everywhere because we're so multicultural. Perhaps you need to sound more, you need your language to sound more Americanized, if that makes sense. As long as you're understandable, it's good, because an accent, as in any other uniqueness about you, adds to you becoming an object of interest to your audience. Next question.
This one is from Joanna. Which is worse, exceeding the time allotted for the speech and deleting valuable content at the end, or completing the speech as written so the structure is delivered / the point of speech is given and the point to get the audience to connect with the speech and feel empathy is reached?
Well, I believe what you're saying is if you have a choice of keeping on time with the schedule or leaving out your brilliant content, what do you do? Whether this is a business meeting or a meeting where you are the guest speaker, always ask the person in charge of the meeting, is it more important to you that I deliver the hour that you booked me for or keep you on schedule? And based on 35 years of being paid to speak, 80% of the time, if this is a convention with an agenda or a business meeting with a tight schedule that is advertised, they want you to stay on point. The secret with a good speech structure is that almost in the moment, you can take segments out and not have the audience know. And Ed Tate, who is one of my partners in World Champions Edge and Lady in the Champs conference that we deliver every February. In fact, Paul, perhaps we want to ask our attendees if they've ever attended a Lady in the Champs in the poll session. He with his world champion winning speech, what happened, he saw the red light, which meant you got to close. And he had a close. He also had an emergency close. I was just speaking at the Professional Speaking Association in London, a keynote slot, and I found that my time was up and it was very tight for them that I keep on time. And I had more content, however, my presentation time was up. And fortunately, although I didn't have this in my back pocket as my emergency close, I now realize this worked. Because at the beginning of my presentation, I was talking about being a hairstylist. It was very important that they were stressing, hey, she thinks she's American, but no, she's one of us. She's a Brit. And I talked about becoming a hairstylist in Bournemouth in England. And then I realized my time is out. I got a couple of minutes. And I tied it up with, in 2000, at the National Speakers Association convention, 60 Minutes was there for 5 days. And they were trying to make it very controversial about these speakers, they're only in it for the money, etc. And I was asked, Patricia, this was by Ed Bradley, by the way, Patricia, you used to be a hairstylist, now you're a speaker, it's got to be a big difference. And my line was, I used to work on the outside of my clients' heads. Now I work on the inside. There's only half an inch difference. And that soundbite statement, that line got me on 60 Minutes. And that was how I closed my speech, because it was then a circular technique of starting with being a hairstylist, closing with being a speaker, and tying in the connection to my roots. Excuse the pun. Paul, what did the polls tell us?
On the poll, there was 32% of people who have attended, and then the remainder have not.
Well, what we want you to know is go to World Champs Live. In fact, I don't know if you can type that in for them, Paul. World Champs Live. And you will see there, Lady in the Champs Speakers Conference is the convention every year with Darren LaCroix, Ed Tate, Craig Valentine, and of course, Patricia Fripp, four of the best speaker coaches in the country, joined by one of the best humorists and humorist teacher, Tim Gard, and my brother, Robert Fripp, who is an internationally acclaimed guitarist, played on David Bowie's Heroes, has a group, King Crimson, and he is as articulate a speaker as he is a guitarist. And when you go to how to open and close a speech, you will find my brother's words in how to close a presentation, and you will see what I mean. And check it out. Also, in December the 3rd, 4th, and 5th, Darren LaCroix and I have a coaching camp in Las Vegas where you can either sign up to be coached by the two of us in the hot seat or come and watch. And we've had people come from Japan and New Zealand just to watch us in the process. So World Champs Live, check that out. And also, Paul, these series of events are brought to you as a part of a service, and also, let's be honest, a promotion for Frip virtual training. So, Paul, could you do a screen share and show us Frip VT as they would sign up?
Absolutely, that's on the screen now.
Good, perfect. So if you can see Frip VT, and if you can just put your mouse, Paul, as where they would take a free trial if they are not a member. So you can sign up and you can get 3 different chapters to see the experience. And if you consider, would it be helpful if you had access to this type of information on a regular basis, learn at your own speed, then Frip virtual training is designed for you. So we have been discussing, how do you emotionally connect to your audience? Naturally, you find that in Frip VT. How do you structure your presentation with flexibility? How do you tap into the treasure trove of your career, or your life and career, to find content? How do you add specificity and stories? Then it's certainly leadership presentations, your options of openings. We have more information. So if you can bring this back to me, Paul, and let us see if we can set up one more poll, Paul. I believe we have it. Is do you think it would be an advantage if they had this access to this type of information on a regular basis? Not quite sure how we phrase that, but if you can bring it up, and let's see if there are any more questions that I need to answer.
There was another question from, excuse me, Janice. If you have one main story in a 20-minute speech, what is the most amount of time that story should be?
It depends. It depends on how many points within the speech there are. It also depends on what is your purpose and goal for the audience. You might have just one story that takes 17 minutes. You're going to open and close somehow that ties into the point of that story, and you might tell the story and take 8 minutes. And then you say, within that, these are the lessons, 1, 2, 3, 4, and then you develop those lessons. So it all depends. You have so many options. That is why, with the same techniques and principles and examples, every speech is different. Any more questions, Paul?
There was one more. In the magnifying glass speech, this is from Roger Matthews, he said it was an amazing speech, and he wants to know how you add the simplicity to your speech so that it's easy to deliver, and he just mentioned that you do truly transform speeches.
Now this was, I'm not sure, under the magnifying glass speech, the idea is to get to your next level of development, whatever that is that we have to take a closer look at what it is we are saying and how we're saying it. And we take one idea is, if there were one secret of giving a good speech, it would be that your subject is of interest to your audience. We also look at the simplicity of having a speech structure. We look at the specificity of words and how you can use picture words. And one word I would take, and we're going to say this in everyday life, of course I say it, however with a speech you have thought in advance of what you're going to say. I was coaching an attorney about a speech on modern day slavery. And she's telling a story about the man who woos this young woman, takes her off to another country, and you know the end of the story, not too happy. And what she said was, he promised her many things. And I said, no, he didn't. He promised her a life of romance and adventure. Those two words, romance and adventure, give the audience more information than the amount of time that it takes. No matter what your level of development, always step backwards and look at the power of the words. Now, with that, Paul, are there any more questions? Because we've kept our audience for 55 minutes and we need to soon say goodbye. Just want to make sure everyone who has a question gets an answer.
There are no other questions at this time.
Perfect. Well, our audience is in tune and on time as well. So World Champs Live for the coaching camp in December and Lady and the Champs. And for our friends, and I know we have several signed in who are in other countries, we are streaming this virtually. So go to World Champs Live and you will find ladyandthechampsconference.com. Then please, if you are not a VT user, why not go to Frip VT, as in virtual training on powerful persuasive presentations, take a trial. By the way, Paul, how did our guests tell us, would this advice be helpful on a regular basis?
Nearly 100% said yes. It was 93% yes and 7% no.
Well, I don't know what's wrong with the 7%. Well, 93%. If you are not a VT user, I expect to see you in taking a trial. It's 24/7 access to Frip. It's highly interactive, so you really learn the information and look around. And we have special meetings for our VT users. And Paul, as we go away, we are also going to put up an announcement in case you were not on the list at 2 o'clock Pacific, which is 5 o'clock Eastern, and 10 o'clock for our friends in England and Ireland, although we just had a time change and I'm not sure you did, so you need to be clear on that. We are having a conversation with Mark LeBlanc, who will be at Lady and the Champs. He is one of our streaming sponsors, and we will be interviewing him on how do you position yourself to get higher fees. And Paul will put that up so at the end of this conference you can click through and get access. Now, if you can't sign in live, that's okay, just as we know a lot of people will be listening to the replay of this rather than in person. You can sign up and we will send you, or the system automatically sends you, a replay link so you can watch it whenever it suits you. So remember, all learning needs repetition and reinforcement. If you want access to the best information and where you can digest it on your own time, on your own device, whatever suits you, Frip VT, and watch your emails, you will probably be getting more invitations to other meetings. See you soon. And thank you, Paul.